So this is a very fundamental human dynamic, that whatever you're attending more and more to, you tend to get more and more of. And that's helpful for people to see. And it can be hopeful. And so by thinking about your wins in the past, and everyone can do it. You can always think of things that have gone well. And he said that this is where clinical experience comes in, but he said that sometimes people will say, oh, there's nothing, I can't see anything. He said it takes them just 1 minute of really trying, and then they start to see things.
Hey, this is Sharif here with another episode of the Golden Hour, joined by Dr. Kevin Majers. Kevin, good to be back here with you.
Hey, Sharif, great to be back.
Yeah, Kevin. Well, we were recently recommended a book, and it was requested, I think, that we do a podcast on it and discuss it. And there's a lot of similarities between this book, which I'll shortly reveal, and our approach and the kind of things that we're trying to do. The book is called The Confident Mind by Nate Zinsser. And so I thought we could do this episode on that book. How's that sound?
Yeah, it sounds like it's an interesting book to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
It has some great ideas in it.
Yeah, so he's dealing with he teaches or taught at West Point and prepares soldiers for the mental challenges they'll face, like preparing them mentally for war, for combat, and then he's now written this book to apply that to the everyday person of how do you use these strategies and techniques that help soldiers prepare mentally to then succeed in our daily lives.
Yeah, that's right. So he's the head of the performance psychology program at West Point, but it's pretty clear in the book that he has a private practice of sorts, because he talks about Eli Manning and all these other athletes that he has worked with. So it sounds like he has a pretty active consulting gig going on at the same time, and has created a name for himself at being able to help people at the Olympic level or the Super Bowl level perform at their best.
Mm-hmm. So it's clearly the people that he's worked with have seen lots of success. So there's definitely going to be a lot of good insights to draw out of this. And then I think it'll be interesting.
I love books written by people. But I love books written by people who actually work with people for a living, so that you get a kind of clinical wisdom or expertise that comes through that, to me, just make them enjoyable reads to see, okay, they might not have like the theory perfect or all the science supporting it. But hey, who does? And it's like, they're at least really good at helping people. So I think I appreciate that in Nate Zinsser.
Yeah. If he wasn't good at helping people, he'd be out of a job pretty quick. So, and then I think it'll be interesting to compare his approach with ours, because he's arrived at many similar ideas, I think. And also that he works primarily with, as I mentioned, soldiers and athletes is another big group that he's worked with, where the challenges are primarily physical, I think. So just to compare that with, now he does talk about people who work in an office and people who do mental tasks. So, and obviously there are mental tasks involved in sports and combat, but so I think it'll just be interesting to make that comparison to apply his insights to other areas. Well, okay. So Kevin, the book is called The Confident Mind. So for him, confidence is the theme, the organizing idea. So maybe we could start with just how does he define confidence? What does he see it as? And why is it so central for him?
If I were to maybe give or slightly tweak his definition of confidence, it has to do with your relationship to self-doubt. And are you able to perform at your best even in the presence of self-doubt? So what I like to think of, say, with courage is your ability to engage a dangerous challenge, no matter what level of fear you have. So courage doesn't necessarily mean you have a lot of fear. It doesn't mean certainly you have no fear. It just means that the fear, in fact, is now irrelevant. And you're able to engage this dangerous challenge fully So without fear dictating what you do. And confidence is very much like that. And it's a specific kind of fear, which is really self-doubt. And I think that is the fear of failure. So it's kind of like confidence is a little bit of a shard of courage. So it's it's more like a skill of handling self-doubt or the fear of failure so that you can so that a challenge can bring out your best. So that would mean then that for the fully confident person, the level of self-doubt they have is irrelevant. They might have it, they might not, and I think in that sense, he helps people handle the preparation phase especially well. Like when you see a big challenge coming, should your main goal be to lessen your self-doubt? And then what would that mean? Like, how do you get rid of it without becoming a vicious cycle? That's the trap many people fall into. And so that's my concern with an approach is that it has to be robust enough that it can't fail. It has to be that no matter what, people are able to learn from the experience.
I see. So now you've given this is your definition, is being able to bear with self-doubt and still pursue right action, maybe is.
Yeah, and he more or less says that. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So how is that different from courage? I mean, because any time you're in a situation where there's fear involved or danger or any kind of difficulty, it seems like there's going to be self-doubt. I think that would be natural. So is
Yeah.
it just a
I think that
conceptual difference?
courage is a more robust concept.
Okay.
So I think that courage, because it's dealing with fear, which is a primary, like, it's just an emotion that we have.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if self-doubt produced no fear, would it be important? No,
Mm.
it's only important because it actually produces fear. So really confidence, as he's describing it, is like a kind of a special case of courage,
Okay.
I think you could
So
say.
would you say it's courage for thoughts, whereas courage properly is courage for the emotion of fear? Self-doubts are thoughts. So it's just looking at the thought dimension versus the emotional dimension.
I think that's exactly right.
Okay.
Yeah, that he's talking about what do you do with negative thoughts that are really about where you're doubting your ability to succeed in some way.
Hmm. Which just seems is consistent with, and you'll be the better judge of that, is developments in psychology recently of cognitive behavioral therapy to focus on the thoughts that people have about the situations that maybe wasn't as present in earlier classical approaches to virtue theory. I don't think Aristotle talks that much about the thoughts.
Well, in some ways, I would say this might kind of date the approach because it is precisely focused on negative thoughts and how you handle them. And that's more what's called the second wave of CBT, which is primarily cognitive therapy. In the later wave, the third wave, and whatever we do, which I think is actually post third wave. It's not so much about that the thoughts. It's more about the emotion because that generalizes things more. So, in one of the tricky things about confidence, and the way he writes about it is, it ends up being extremely specific. That you're confident about your ability not just to play basketball, but to do a three-pointer from this distance, from this angle, or in these conditions. So it gets very specific, where it basically becomes a very honed skill of being able to do something. So I think that's a limitation, actually, that when you focus instead on not just a particular, because you can have self-doubt about an aspect of your basketball game, and maybe you get comfortable in one aspect, but you still have self-doubt in another. Well, when you're dealing with the emotion itself as the main thing, it generalizes much more. And then rather than it just being a kind of particular skill, it actually becomes more of an ideal. So it's an ideal that you're aiming for and growing in. But that said, he does have some great ways of helping people to to have this kind of confidence insofar as it's helpful. So I think it's good also that we focus on the, like, what does he bring to the table and what of this is actually useful, because if it's useful, it's helping people reframe the experience of self-doubt into something constructive, and I think that's always possible.
Great. Yeah. So let's then get to some of the practices that he recommends. So he's always putting the emphasis on mentally preparing for difficult situations, for challenges, which is exactly what we like to do, like to help people with, is how do you prepare your mind for challenge. So what kind of jumped out at you in his approaches? I think to me, I observed he focused on visualization was a big one for him, uh, and then also then focusing on your thoughts and your kind of perception of yourself and your past failures was another interesting one. So I don't know if you were able to discern a kind of structure in the way he was approaching it.
Yeah, I think he's trying to help people to focus on what they want and not what they don't want. So it's better that you imagine something going well, he says, and you lay down then that as a kind of template in your mind for the activity, rather than trying to see how it doesn't go well. Now, this goes back a long way in psychology, and it's even in the hypnotic literature, which is where this is dealt with the most. It's because hypnosis is all about visualization. There's a difference in telling. Imagine that you have a child that is carrying something that's very expensive and can break very easily, and you see them carrying it. Like, ooh, if you say "don't drop that," you're giving them an image of themselves dropping it, and some of the research maybe it's from the 60s and 70s, but still it is suggesting that they're actually more likely to drop it because the mind isn't so good at handling the don't, and says it just has this image of dropping it. But if you say instead, hold that carefully, then they have an image of them holding it carefully and they're less likely to drop it. Now, in a way, that's what a lot of this visualization stuff comes down to. I don't think it's especially profound, and I don't think the effects are really that great. Andrew Huberman talks about the visualization as having two different stages. One is at the very beginning of a task, and then to get started, he says it's more motivating to visualize success. But he claims, I have to say, I haven't been able to find the literature on this, and so if our listeners do, they can always let us know. That, but visualizing failure is better along the way, because that's what keeps you motivated to not fail. That I don't really like either, in the sense that I don't see why visualizing failure, would be particularly helpful. Like you're motivating yourself just by fear. Well, yeah, that's a kind of motivation, but I think in Optimal Work, we're always talking about letting go of the motives of fear, because I don't think that really brings out your best performance. And there we agree totally with Nate Zinsser, that it's better that you have like a positive sense of what it looks like and that you try to practice that. Okay, so that said, he has some interesting exercises for people to do if and I have done these with people and I found them to be really helpful. And so one of them is your top 10 list. So the top 10 list, he thinks of it as a kind of filter on your memories to keep the bad memories out, which in my mind, that kind of risks making them into a threat. So like you try to keep them out, but it is helpful for people to see um, how they're making progress. So you can like write down in your chosen field what have been the biggest wins that you've had when it was things that like took skill and took your living work at its best. What kind of wins did you have there? And you make a list of these wins. And what's interesting comes out of that is you actually start to see the different ways you've been improving. And that lets you get a sense of what further growth could look like. So by reflecting on ways you have grown in your job, or if you're a stay-at-home mom, how you have maybe with successive children handled it different, better and better, and look and see like what were your finest moments, the things you're kind of proud of in how you've handled things. By focusing on what went well, you do think more than about reproducing it. So you're thinking, well, actually, this did go very well. And so I could think in my own psychiatric practice, what were the things that went well? And, oh, yeah, it's true. I haven't done that for a while, or I haven't tried to do that in a while. How could I bring that back now? What would it look like? So it's an interesting way of opening up. So Sharif, for you, it'd be like, what are the top 10 biggest wins you've had as a I guess you're more than a programmer, as a co-founder. Like, what are your best moments as co-founder? And when you look at the things that were the biggest wins for you, it would probably show you ways of growing that you'd kind of be excited about.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
that's an
So this,
interesting way of reviewing.
yeah. So it's not, I guess one reason I can think of why to do the top 10, and maybe this is a little bit how I was interpreting it, was that people tend to have a cognitive bias or distortion. This is almost the negative processing bias, to just focus too much on the negatives and reasons why you've been bad in the past and you're going to fail in the future. And so part of it is overcoming that negative processing bias. But what you're giving a much deeper perspective to it, which is that it's not just about having you like helping you to have a more realistic assessment of your past, but it's about how to prepare for the future by focusing on what's actually been good, and therefore what can be good in the future.
Yeah. And by seeing how, so for instance, if I were to look at, the last 10 talks that I've given, to large audiences, and then to see, okay, what have been the highlights of those, and to write them down, I would start to see then things to look forward to in the next ones, and things where I could invest perhaps more deliberate energy in making like continued progress along that way. Or I could think, how did I make that progress in the past? And then find ways of reproducing that. So I think that's a helpful, anytime you have like a core part of your work, and everyone does, there's some core to your day. The more you can think of ways of growing in that core and like what have been the best moments, that is really helpful, I think.
And then just to add to that, one piece of advice that you've given me was to, when you're giving feedback to other people, then also to be more focused on the positive. So it's more encouraging of people to say, hey, you did this really well. This was a great story you included in the talk. And then that cues them, okay, the stories are good. Good stories are good. So in future talks, we'll include more stories, as opposed to just saying, oh, yeah, you stutter a lot,
Yeah,
which is not as
exactly.
helpful.
Yeah, it's
So
like
he's,
parents with children would always, it's better that they be pointing out the things that are going well,
mhm.
because that's what you get more of. And it's the same like in any kind of bond. If you focus, on what's going well in the bond and appreciate that, you tend to get more of it. And if you focus on what's not going well and you complain about that, you tend to get more of that too. So this is a very fundamental human dynamic, that whatever you're attending more and more to, you tend to get more and more of. And that's helpful for people to see. And it can be hopeful. And so by thinking about your wins in the past, and everyone can do it. You can always think of things that have gone well. And he said that this is where clinical experience comes in, but he said that sometimes people will say, oh, there's nothing, I can't see anything. He said it takes them just 1 minute of really trying, and then they start to see things. And then once you start listing things, it gets easier and easier. So, and it just depends on how much of a negative bias does your memory have. Another thing that he has that is helpful is the ESP, or in his more recent things, he's talked about ESPN. And that is a kind of daily review that you can do. And so I think this could be a helpful thing at the end of a work day or at the end of the day, to go through then these four things. And the way he lists it in there is you look at one moment in the day that's part of the core of your day, and you ask yourself, how did I put in effort here to do this well? And then what kind of success, was there anything in it where I felt like it was going well? And so that's E, and then S is success, and then P is progress. Looking back on how I do this kind of activity, can I see progress? Is there anything here getting easier over time? And then the last thing is N, which is next. What do I want to do then? Is there any way I want to keep developing this in my next time doing it tomorrow? But I think that is also a very helpful way for people to review things. So you can start to look at, for E, for effort. I don't think really I would look back at things where I really pushed hard and it was effort like that. I would want to see more. Was there any strategy? Did I have a new strategy when I was doing that activity? did I have some way that I had thought about in advance of doing it better? So that's how you channel your effort, is through a strategy. So I think that's crucial. And then as far as the success goes, I think success really I would call traction. Is that your strategy is paying off and now you started to get traction in the task. You felt like you were engaged fully. You had the kind of intensity of focus and concentration during that time. And then progress is great. So to be thinking of, is there anything, I think of that as momentum, but are there any signs then that you're building momentum in this? So in Optimal Work, we do often talk about strategy, traction, momentum. And that's always the way to make progress in something that's important. Come up with a strategy, and if you don't get traction, then you come up with next time with a new strategy. And you keep trying new little strategies, and then you start getting more and more traction in them. And then over time, you get more and more momentum. So, and that just means that it becomes more and more energizing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I think
So
I think that's a very useful review to do. And
yeah,
it's a
so you're
way of
right.
reviewing your day at the end.
Okay, so doing that, and just to be clear, the previous exercise was the top 10, which you can just do now to just look back on
Yeah.
your whole life or your career.
Yeah. Whatever your chosen field is,
Mhm.
that to be choosing that and then looking at areas within that.
And then with ESPN or with STMN, strategy, traction, momentum next, do you pick one particular kind of domain that you're working on and say, okay, I'm going to look at what new strategies, what traction have I gotten, what momentum am I experiencing? Or is it just my day as a whole? So would I be looking at, okay, in my time that I spent today programming, because I want to be a better programmer, say?
Yeah. So I think it would work for either. You could just look at your day as a whole. What kind of new strategies did I try using today? Did I have any moments today of strategizing? And then at what point in my day did I have the most traction? And then looking at it over, can I see areas that are getting easier with practice where I'm making progress? That's the momentum. But you could also do it for a very simple thing. You could just take one moment of the day. You could take, I could think back to a patient I saw. Okay, just take one of my patient hours. In that session, did I have a strategy? Was I trying any new strategy? Was I getting traction with that? And then also, can I see ways here that I'm getting better over time? And do I have a direction I'm trying to take this progress? So I think, yeah, for you, it could be any moment of programming, or it could be a meeting that you have with someone, and think, how are these meetings going? What you're doing then is you're looking back at the day to see actually what's going well. So that otherwise, this helps people to not get discouraged or to think they're not making progress. You start to see, actually every day I am making a lot of little progress. And it seems to me that when people are really thriving, this kind of stuff is always going on. They're always doing little ways of tweaking, little ways of improving. And kind of throughout the day, there's this tone of creative strategies, and then getting more or less traction as they're going through, and they keep on seeing, how can I keep this going, but not out of a sense of fear or perfectionism, but just out of a sense of enjoying the challenge and enjoying the process of shaping oneself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I really like this approach because, I mean, one of the things I really like about reframing is that it's positive, but not superficially so. So Nate Zinsser's approach seems to me very positive, but not in a superficial way. I mean, it's reasonably positive. Um, well, Kevin, I think we've gone through some of his big ideas, and we're reached pretty much our time here. So I don't know if you want to leave us with any final comments or thoughts.
I guess my final thought would be that if I were talking to Nate Zinsser, I would congratulate him on the book and how so many people are going to be able to be more positive about challenges and to come up with ways of becoming more confident in how they approach it. And I'd also say that the he has at times said he wishes he could know how to generalize these things. And in interviews, he said that when people say, "Yeah, it's because really you become really confident in one area, but then how do you transfer it to another?" And he treated that as like the $10 million question. I think that actually he's not far at all from just seeing that ideals are the most beautiful qualities that we can practice, And the difficulties, like self-doubt, only make the ideals that much more rich and beautiful. So um, to see how a challenge can bring out your best and to let it do that, even if you have self-doubt, I think is a very beautiful thing. And that's compatible with living every ideal. But that's the way to provide the best love, the best service to everyone in our lives. More and more, the way we feel about what we're doing is less and less important, and it's more and more the good we're doing for them, and putting and kind of putting, um, I guess putting that forward always as the most important thing. So that would be my. I think he's so close to seeing the vision that we kind of encourage people to have.
Awesome. Kevin, well, that's a great insight, great way to tie things together. So thanks so much for
Oh,
being
for
here
sure.
with us. Yeah, we'll be
Thank
back
you.
next week.